When a robot clown pilots a helicopter and Toronto's Chinatown gets deliberately dirtied to pass for New York, you know you're in for something unusual. From a tragic producer's connection to Princess Diana to censors banning aerosol can tricks, FX2 delivered bizarre behind-the-scenes chaos alongside its on-screen special effects mayhem. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about FX2. Fact 1. Director mysteriously replaced mid-production. Director Richard Franklin was originally hired to helm FX2, bringing his experience from directing Psycho 2 and other genre films to the project. However, partway through production in 1991, Franklin experienced what the studio vaguely described as personal problems that prevented him from completing the film. The exact nature of these problems was never publicly disclosed, and Franklin himself rarely discussed what happened during the making of FX2 in later interviews. What is known is that legendary stunt coordinator and second unit director Vic Armstrong was quietly brought in to direct the final weeks of the shoot. Armstrong, who had doubled for Harrison Ford in the Indiana Jones films and coordinated stunts on countless major productions, stepped into the director's chair to finish the action sequences and wrap up principal photography. This was not widely publicized at the time, and most audiences who saw FX2 in theaters had no idea there had been a director change during production. The transition appears to have been handled smoothly enough that the final film doesn't show obvious signs of conflicting directorial visions. Though the movie's emphasis on elaborate action set pieces in the third act may reflect Armstrong's stunt-heavy sensibilities. Franklin would later express disillusionment with the Hollywood system after this experience, and FX2 became his final American studio film. He returned to Australia and shifted his focus towards smaller, more personal projects for the remainder of his career. The mysterious circumstances surrounding his departure from FX2 remain one of the more puzzling behind-the-scenes stories from early 90s action cinema. Fact 2. Tragic connection to Princess Diana. One of FX2's producers was Dodi Fayed, the Egyptian film producer and son of billionaire businessman Mohammed Al Fayed. At the time of the film's release in 1991, Fayed was building his career in Hollywood and had produced several films, including Chariots of Fire and Hook. FX2 was among his later producing credits during this period of active work in the film industry. Just 6 years after FX2 hit theaters, Fayed became known worldwide for an entirely different and tragic reason. On August 31, 1997, Dodi Fayed and Princess Diana were killed in a devastating car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, France. The couple had been dating that summer and were attempting to evade paparazzi photographers when their Mercedes crashed at high speed. The driver, Henri Paul, and Fayed died at the scene, while Diana died hours later from her injuries. The crash sparked international mourning and intense media scrutiny that continues to this day. For those revisiting FX2's credits, seeing Dodi Fayed's name serves as a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change and how a routine film credit can become connected to one of the 20th century's most shocking and widely mourned tragedies. FX2 stands as one of his penultimate film credits before that fateful night in Paris, representing a time when his life and career were still filled with possibility. Fact 3. Toronto's streets needed to be dirtied. Like many Hollywood productions in the 1990s, FX2 was shot almost entirely in Toronto, Canada, standing in for New York City to take advantage of favorable tax incentives and lower production costs. However, the production team quickly discovered a problem with this substitution. Toronto's streets, particularly in the Chinatown district, where several key scenes were filmed, were simply too clean to convincingly pass for the grittier, more lived-in streets of Manhattan. New York City in the early 1990s still had a reputation for grime and urban decay that Toronto, known for being remarkably clean and well-maintained, simply couldn't match without help. The art department and location team had to deliberately dirty up Toronto's streets before filming could begin. This involved spreading carefully placed trash, adding graffiti to walls, and generally making the Canadian streets look more worn down and less pristine than they actually were. It was an unusual reversal of the typical cleaning and preparation that locations usually undergo before filming. The crew essentially had to make things look worse rather than better. This artificial weathering and strategic messmaking became a significant part of the pre-production work, and it required careful attention to detail to avoid overdoing it and making the streets look unrealistically filthy. The effort paid off, and most audiences watching FX2 had no idea they were actually looking at Toronto rather than New York. A testament to the location team's commitment to authenticity through intentional deterioration. Fact 4. Future Oscar winner wrote the script. The screenplay for FX2 was written by Bill Condon, who at the time was a working screenwriter with several credits but no major accolades to his name. Condon had been writing for films and television throughout the 1980s, but FX2 represented mainstream action movie work that gave little indication of where his career would eventually lead. Just 7 years later, in 1998, Condon would write and direct Gods and Monsters, a biographical drama about Frankenstein director James Whale, played by Ian McKellen. The film was a critical darling and earned Condon the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, suddenly establishing him as a serious dramatic filmmaker rather than just an action movie scribe. He followed this success with another Oscar nomination for his screenplay for Chicago in 2002, the musical that would go on to win Best Picture. Condon would later direct both Dreamgirls and the final 2 films in the Twilight Saga, showing remarkable range across genres. Looking back at FX2 through the lens of Condon's later career, it's fascinating to see how his earlier work on this action sequel, with its themes of illusion and deception, contained seeds of the more complex character studies and theatrical sensibilities he would later explore. The film's script, while serving the needs of a commercial sequel, shows moments of clever plotting and character work that hint at Condon's storytelling abilities, even if they were not yet fully realized in this particular project. Fact 5. Censored for teaching bomb making. One of the more controversial aspects of FX2 was a scene where the character Mike Tyler, played by Brian Dennehy, demonstrates how to convert an ordinary aerosol spray can into an improvised explosive device or grenade using basic materials. The sequence was intended to showcase Tyler's resourcefulness and special effects expertise, showing how someone with technical knowledge could weaponize everyday household items. However, censors in New Zealand took serious issue with this scene, viewing it not as harmless movie fiction, but as potentially dangerous instructional content. The New Zealand Censor Board ruled that the scene must be cut from prints shown in their country on the grounds that it might inspire copycat behavior or provide a blueprint for would-be criminals or terrorists to create real, improvised explosive devices. This was during an era when concerns about movie violence and its potential real-world effects were frequently debated, particularly after several high-profile incidents were blamed on films. The New Zealand decision to censor this specific scene rather than the film's overall violence was notable because it targeted practical technical knowledge rather than graphic content. The ruling essentially accused FX2 of being an unintentional bomb-making tutorial disguised as entertainment. While the scene remained intact in most international markets, including the United States. The New Zealand censorship decision highlights an ongoing tension between creative freedom and social responsibility, particularly when films depict realistic methods for creating weapons or causing harm that viewers might theoretically replicate. Fact 6. The film gave away trade secrets. When FX2 was released in May of 1991, it faced unexpected criticism from an unusual source: professional special effects artists working in the film industry. The movie, which centered on special effects expert Raleigh Tyler and his elaborate tricks and illusions, featured numerous detailed sequences showing exactly how various practical effects were created and executed. These weren't vague movie magic moments, but rather explicit demonstrations of professional techniques, including makeup effects, mechanical rigs, hidden cameras, and other tools of the trade. Some effects artists felt the film was essentially giving away trade secrets that professionals had spent years developing and refining. The concern was that by showing these techniques in such detail, the film was demystifying the craft and potentially making it easier for amateurs or competitors to replicate professional-level work without putting in the proper training and experience. There was also a concern that revealing these methods too explicitly would make audiences more skeptical and less impressed by effects work in other films, since they would now understand how certain illusions were accomplished. This criticism represented an interesting conflict between entertainment value and professional discretion. The filmmakers clearly felt that showcasing real effects techniques would add authenticity and fascination to the story, while some in the industry felt this transparency crossed a line. The debate touched on larger questions about whether certain professional knowledge should remain somewhat secretive and exclusive, or whether transparency and education serve the greater good of advancing the craft and educating audiences. Fact 7. Edited down from R to PG-13, FX2 was originally conceived, scripted, and shot as an R-rated film, following in the footsteps of the first FX movie, which had carried an R rating when it was released in theaters in 1986. The sequel was filmed with similar levels of violence, language, and intense action sequences that would naturally earn an R rating from the Motion Picture Association of America. However, something interesting happened between the theatrical release of the first film and the planning of the sequel. The original FX had been edited for violence and language when it aired on network television, bringing it down to acceptable levels for broadcast. Surprisingly, this edited television version performed extremely well in the ratings and introduced the film to a much broader audience than had seen it in theaters. Studio executives took notice of these strong television numbers and realized there was significant commercial potential in making FX2 more accessible to younger viewers and families. Rather than release the R-rated cut they had filmed, the studio made the decision to edit FX2 down to a PG-13 rating before its theatrical release. This involved trimming violent sequences, removing or redubbing profanity, and toning down some of the more intense moments. The goal was to capture a wider audience from the start rather than waiting for an eventual television broadcast. This decision reflected changing attitudes in early 90s Hollywood, where studios were increasingly aware of the commercial advantages of PG-13 ratings over R ratings, particularly for R. Action films that could appeal to teenage audiences with parental permission. Fact 8. The Home Alone influence FX2 was released in May of 1991, just 6 months after Home Alone had become a massive unexpected phenomenon during the Christmas season of 1990. Home Alone had grossed nearly $500 million worldwide and had captivated audiences with its elaborate sequences of young Kevin McAllister defending his house using improvised booby traps made from household items. The film's climactic sequences featured paint cans swinging from strings, heated doorknobs, tar-covered stairs, and other creative uses of everyday objects as weapons. When FX2 hit theaters less than half a year later, audiences couldn't help but notice the striking similarities in its extended supermarket showdown sequence. In this scene, the heroes use their special effects expertise to create elaborate traps throughout a grocery store to defeat armed assassins. The sequence features improvised weapons made from store merchandise, carefully planned defensive positions, and the heroes using their knowledge of physics and chemistry to turn ordinary products into effective deterrents. While FX2 was certainly written and filmed before Home Alone became a cultural phenomenon, the timing of the releases meant that audiences were primed to see the supermarket sequence as an adult, R-rated version of Kevin McAllister's suburban warfare. The comparison was both beneficial and potentially limiting for FX2, as it could ride some of Home Alone's goodwill while also risking seeming derivative of a children's film. The influence worked both ways in popular culture, as both films demonstrated the audience appeal of watching clever underdogs use ingenuity and preparation to overcome more powerful adversaries through creative use of their environment. Fact 9. Bluey the Clown's expensive malfunction. The opening scene of FX2 features one of the film's most memorable and bizarre visual moments. A supposed alien cyborg wearing a blonde wig disguised in drag attire, terrorizing the streets before being revealed as an elaborate animatronic special effect. According to production notes and interviews, this $250,000 animatronic prop was one of the most expensive single effects pieces created for the film. The cyborg character, nicknamed Bluey the Clown by the crew, was designed to be a Terminator-inspired creation that Raleigh Tyler was supposedly working on for a science fiction film within the film. The animatronic featured complex mechanical systems, hydraulic movements, and the ability to bleed blue fluid when shot. However, the expensive prop reportedly malfunctioned repeatedly during filming, causing delays and forcing the effects team to constantly repair and recalibrate its systems. The irony was not lost on the cast and crew that a film about special effects experts was itself being plagued by temperamental special effects. Equipment. The prop's unreliability became something of an in-joke on set, with the malfunctioning animatronic almost seeming to mirror the chaos and disorder that would affect the production itself when director Richard Franklin experienced his mysterious problems and had to be replaced. The opening sequence's depiction of an effects demonstration gone wrong ended up being somewhat prophetic for the troubled production that followed. Despite all the technical difficulties, the final scene with Bluey made it into the film largely intact, and the expensive animatronic became one of FX2's most distinctive and memorable images, appearing in promotional materials and becoming a symbol of the film's blend of practical effects craftsmanship and tongue-in-cheek humor about the special effects industry. Fact 10. The Impossible Gold Coin Plot. The central MacGuffin of FX2 revolves around a set of solid gold medallions that supposedly were cast by the Renaissance master Michelangelo Buonarroti, depicting figures from his famous frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. According to the film's plot, these priceless golden medallions show the bronze-colored figures from Michelangelo's masterwork and were created by the artist himself as some sort of companion pieces to his ceiling paintings. The medallions are stolen from the Vatican and become the object that various criminals and corrupt officials are desperately trying to recover, driving much of the film's action and intrigue. There's just one significant problem with this entire premise. No such medallions ever existed in history. Michelangelo never created gold medallions depicting the Sistine Chapel ceiling figures, and there is absolutely no historical record or art historical documentation of any such objects ever being made during the Renaissance or any other period. The entire concept was invented purely for the movie's plot and has no basis whatsoever in actual art history or Vatican treasures. Michelangelo was primarily known for his sculpture, painting, and architecture. And while he did occasionally work in other mediums, there's no evidence he ever cast gold medallions of any kind, let alone ones depicting his own ceiling frescoes. For anyone with even basic knowledge of Renaissance art history, the premise falls apart immediately. The filmmakers apparently felt that attributing the medallions to Michelangelo would give them sufficient gravitas and importance to justify the intense pursuit by the villains without worrying too much about historical accuracy. It's a testament to the film's entertainment value that this completely fictional art historical premise doesn't significantly detract from audience enjoyment. Fact 11. Clinking gold that shouldn't clink. Sharp-eared viewers and physics enthusiasts have long pointed out a significant audio mistake involving the gold medallions that serve as FX2's central MacGuffin. Throughout the film, whenever the medallions are handled, moved, or placed together, they produce a distinct metal-on-metal clinking sound, similar to what you might hear from steel coins or brass tokens being clinked together. The sound design team clearly added these metallic clinking effects to emphasize the handling of the valuable objects and to create an audible cue for the audience that the important medallions were on screen. However, there's a fundamental problem with this sound design choice. Real gold, due to its density and molecular structure, does not resonate or ring the way harder metals do. When solid gold objects strike each other, they produce a very dull, muted thud or clunk rather than any kind of bright ringing clink. Gold is a relatively soft metal compared to steel, brass, or bronze, and it absorbs vibrations rather than amplifying them. Professional metalworkers, jewelers, and anyone who has handled actual gold objects would immediately recognize that the sound in the film is completely wrong for what is supposedly solid gold. The medallions in FX2 sound more like they're made from steel or possibly brass, which would ring clearly when struck together. This audio mistake appears in multiple scenes throughout the film and was even documented by observant viewers on movie mistake websites. It represents a common film production oversight where sound design prioritizes what is cinematically effective and emotionally satisfying over what would be physically accurate. The bright clinking sound signals importance and value to audiences more effectively than a dull thud would, even though the thud would be correct for actual gold. Fact 12. The gasping plastic-wrapped victim. During FX2's climactic supermarket confrontation sequence, one of the villainous hitmen pursuing the heroes meets a particularly unpleasant fate when he becomes trapped and smothered with clear plastic sheeting. The scene shows the assassin completely wrapped in the plastic material, with it pulled tightly over his entire head and face, covering both his nose and mouth completely. The visual is appropriately claustrophobic and disturbing, showing the character struggling desperately as he suffocates. However, attentive viewers with their volume turned up have noticed a significant audio mistake in this sequence. Even though the hitman's face and mouth are completely sealed beneath layers of clear plastic with no possible opening for air, the film's soundtrack includes loud, desperate gasping and breathing sounds continuing throughout the entire scene. These gasps and labored breathing noises are clearly audible and are obviously meant to add to the intensity and horror of the suffocation moment. The problem is that producing these sounds would be physically impossible. Under the circumstances shown on screen, when someone's nose and mouth are completely sealed by plastic with no air gaps, they cannot draw in any air whatsoever, which means they cannot produce any vocal sounds, including gasps, groans, or breathing noises. The sounds heard in the film could only be made if air were moving through the vocal cords, which requires being able to inhale. This represents a classic film sound design error where the desire to maintain audio intensity and audience engagement overtakes physical plausibility. Silence or only muffled struggling sounds would have been more accurate but potentially less dramatically effective, so the sound designers chose impact over accuracy. Fact 13. Religious services scheduling error. One of the film's key scenes takes place inside a church confessional, where characters are having a clandestine conversation in the supposedly private confessional booth. While this scene plays out in the foreground, careful listeners can hear background audio of a priest reading scripture aloud to the congregation. Specifically, the priest is reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verse 24, which contains Jesus' famous words from the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This particular verse is one of the most significant moments in the Passion narrative, describing Jesus' crucifixion and his words of forgiveness for his executioners. The problem is that if this scene is taking place at St. Patrick's Cathedral or any Catholic church, as the setting suggests, this reading would only occur during very specific liturgical occasions. The Passion narrative from Luke chapter 23 would be read aloud during Palm Sunday Mass or during Holy Week services leading up to Easter, which are among the most important and solemn occasions in the Catholic liturgical calendar. During these major services, particularly when such a significant gospel reading about the crucifixion is being proclaimed, absolutely all of the church's priests would be required to be present in the sanctuary, either concelebrating the Mass or participating in the liturgy. Under these circumstances, there would be no priests available to hear confessions in the confessional booths, as all hands would be needed for the service. Confession times are carefully scheduled around major liturgical celebrations for precisely this reason. This represents either a simple continuity error, where the background audio was chosen for dramatic effect without considering liturgical accuracy, or reflects the filmmaker's lack of familiarity with Catholic Church practices and scheduling. Fact 14. Helicopter piloted by a robot clown. The climactic sequence of FX2 features one of the most absurdly entertaining moments in action movie history, though it requires significant suspension of disbelief. The villainous character played by Philip Bosco, desperate to escape after his crimes have been exposed, races to a waiting helicopter on a rooftop for his getaway. In his panicked state, he rushes toward the helicopter, climbs aboard, and begins giving instructions to the pilot without apparently taking any careful look at who exactly is sitting in the pilot's seat. The audience, however, can clearly see that the helicopter pilot is actually Bluey the Clown, the elaborate animatronic cyborg prop from the film's opening sequence, complete with its mechanical movements and artificial appearance. The robot is being remotely controlled by Raleigh Tyler and his associates, who are operating the controls from a boat positioned below. The setup leads to one of the film's most over-the-top moments as the criminal realizes far too late that his escape vehicle is being piloted by a mechanical puppet. The entire scenario requires accepting that a panicked but presumably intelligent criminal wouldn't immediately notice that his helicopter pilot is obviously a robot, that an animatronic prop could convincingly operate a helicopter's controls well enough to fool someone at close range, and that this incredibly elaborate ruse could be pulled off in real time with split-second timing. It's wonderfully ridiculous in the best tradition of action movie excess, prioritizing spectacular entertainment value over plausibility, and representing FX2 at its most gleefully absurd. Fact 15. Franklin's final American film before disillusionment. For director Richard Franklin, FX2 represented a major turning point in his relationship with Hollywood and the American film industry. Franklin had come to the United States from Australia with significant credentials, having directed Psycho 2 in 1983, which had been both a critical and commercial success that rehabilitated a seemingly impossible sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece. He had followed that with several other American productions, including Link and Cloak and Dagger, establishing himself as a reliable genre director who could handle studio productions. FX2 was meant to be another step forward in his American career, giving him a bigger budget and a franchise property to work with. However, the experience of making FX2, including whatever personal problems caused him to leave the production before it was completed, left Franklin deeply disillusioned with the Hollywood system. In interviews conducted years later, Franklin spoke about his frustrations with studio interference, creative compromises demanded by producers, and the overall corporate nature of American filmmaking that he felt stifled artistic vision. After FX2, Franklin made the decision to return to Australia permanently and refocus his career on smaller, more personal projects where he would have greater creative control. He never directed another American studio film, instead working in Australian television and smaller independent productions. His post-Hollywood work included directing episodes of various Australian television series and some television movies, but nothing that approached the scale or visibility of his American work. For Franklin, FX2 became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong with his Hollywood dreams and his departure from the American film. Industry marked the end of what had once seemed like a promising international directing career.